Hello everyone, my name is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. Welcome to the MuseScore Café. So, this is my regular weekly series, and I know we probably have some new people here because it's my first of the month, first Wednesday Ask Me Anything series that I do within the cafe, and that's always a lot of fun because we get a lot of questions and they come in quick and it's kind of fast-paced. So I'm looking forward to getting started in a moment. I just want to tell you I've pinned the link at the top to my brand new counterpoint course, which surely if you're following me you've been hearing about, but I just wanted to give you the link right up there in case you have a notion to want to sign up and haven't yet. So I won't talk about that a whole ton today. Tomorrow's music masterclass will be a whole special webinar on counterpoint, and I'm going to talk about counterpoint, talk about the course, but talk about counterpoint itself and really try to teach some counterpoint tomorrow. So that's the goal. All right, so here we are in the Ask Me Anything session. So it is now time to start getting some questions here in the chat. And I'm looking here in, I've got it brought up on my phone, not seeing anything there. What I need to check is to see if anything recently came in on the community site, because I asked people if they had scores they needed me to look at to go ahead and post them, and I didn't see any as of the last time I checked this morning, but it looks like there's something new there recently, so perhaps that is something. Oh, I see. This is Joanne's score, and there will be musical things to talk about there. But yeah, I'm ready for your MuseScore questions. Meanwhile, I'm gonna just talk about whatever I feel like talking about until some questions come in. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring up some scores. So I have some scores of my own kind of ready to demonstrate things with as they become appropriate. So, do I have any scores? Yeah, I've got all this. I've got all these lovely fugues and things that I've written lately. So I'm gonna be using those as my demonstrations, perhaps, as we go through some things here. So let me bring up a couple of those, and then we'll have some good examples to talk about. Let's see, under exercises is where so first thing is, yeah, I have all my scores kind of nicely organized into folders that reflect, how I organize things. I recently saw this interesting article suggesting that that's like really old school and that no one uses folders anymore, and that really there's no reason for it, that search facilities are perfectly good. You could just search for the name of a score and get it. Well, this file dialog doesn't have any such thing, so I don't have that option there, but I know on my Windows machine I've got that. So anyhow, those are a couple of scores here. I was looking for some other ones that I thought were in this folder. Here's one. So I'll load that one up. And now I've got a sampling of different things. All right, so we have any questions coming in by now that I've stalled a little bit. So I see a question that I just lost while I popped out my chat. So let me give it a moment to show up here. So I see a couple of playback related questions. So do trills with notes that are not in the scale, and I can show you that. There's a method for it. It's a method to the trill thing. I also see a question that I'm going to ask about prerequisites for the counterpoint course. Let me address that first. Really, if you know basic theory, by which I mean you're comfortable with major and minor scales and you can build triads, I would say if you know that much, you're ready. Even if you don't know triads, I do kind of sort of teach that as part of the course, but not really. I sort of more show you that, oh, by the way, triads happen naturally from the study of counterpoint, and here they are. But if you weren't already familiar with triads, that would be a limiter. So you don't basically my basic music theory course is enough to prepare you for the counterpoint course. You don't really need the harmony course. That said, you'd be that much more successful the more harmony you know. All right, so the question was about playback of trills, and I'm just going to put one in here and then show you how it works. So if I put in a C and then I go to the palette and find my trills and add my trill, it's going to play back with a D. Oh yeah, let me reset my volume so that y'all can hear. All right, so this is playing back C to D. Now, the algorithm is smart enough to recognize that if there's a D flat somewhere in the measure, that maybe it should trill to a D flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one. I'm going to add a D flat in another voice. Now, the trill is against D flat. Of course, I don't want to see that D flat, so I'll make it invisible, and I'll make the flat sign invisible. And furthermore, I don't really want to hear the whole note, so I'll come over here to the inspector and turn off the play for that note. And now that note doesn't play, but it still affects the trill playback. So now I'm getting that C to D flat trill. So there you go. That's a nice little trick, and yes, someday it'll be nice to, for MuseScore 4, there's all sorts of performance-related improvements coming, by playback, I should say, improvements coming, including the possibility, there is a piano roll editor I should show you also. Let me right-click this measure, piano roll editor. And this brings up something that shows you every single note in there, and then you can actually go in there and tweak these individual notes for these ornaments. It's not fun, it's not easy, but it is possible. That's going to hopefully be improved either right at MuseScore 4 or maybe 4.1, where they're still working out exactly what's going to be in when. Okay, so I also see a question about creating house style, and I'll talk about that as other style questions come up, so we can talk about what that might mean. What I will tell you is that we went to some pains to make the default style match what a lot of publishers do. So unless you've got a really specific reason to want to override it, I recommend sticking with the defaults. But as the specific reasons to override them come up, then we'll talk about it. Okay, so I also see a question about repeats. And so the repeat sign, I'm not sure, I guess you mean just the ordinary repeats. That should totally work. If I put some notes in this measure, let me actually make 2 measures worth. And if I put a repeat sign around it, I click here, I go to my bar lines palette, and put in a start repeat, and go over here and put in an end repeat, it'll definitely play back the repeat. Whoops, it didn't. Why didn't it? Because I had turned off the play repeats button on my toolbar, which I often do when I'm doing demonstrations and things, because often, if I'm analyzing the music, I don't need to analyze it twice, right? So I've turned off my playback of repeats. Maybe you accidentally did at some point too, thinking like, what does this button do? But now it repeats. Now, MuseScore needs the repeats to match. If you've got like 3 open repeats and 4 closed repeats, or vice versa in your score, or they're just not matched up, then it won't know what to do. It'll give up and not play any of them. So it's important that they be done correctly. So if you've got a score where you think they're done correctly and you've made sure your repeats button is definitely turned on, go ahead and post it to the conversation space and I can check it out. All right, so what else we have here? We have splitting mid-system to create a gap. So I do this all the time, right, in my handouts. And so let me actually load one of my handouts because they're useful to look at, and it gives me an opportunity to, talk about this. I'm going to look at, I guess, the fugue, one of the fugue handouts. No, I'm actually not. I'm gonna go to one of the imitation handouts and talk about tonal and real imitation. So these gaps here are the kinds of things that's being asked about. This is, as the status bar will tell you, it's a horizontal frame. And you add these from the frames and measures palette here. It's this guy here. So if you select a measure, and so let me come back to my cafe. No, not there. I want to go back to my empty score. If I come here and I click on this measure and I click that, it inserts a frame before it, and that puts a gap there. I can now double click that and either drag the handle or use like arrow keys. I'm using control arrow, or use the inspector to set the actual width of it directly, 10 staff spaces. So that's how you create those gaps. They're very useful. Now listen to what happens in the playback. So this could be exactly what you want. You might want that space just for visual reasons. But like if, okay, so let's look at my handout again. I'm showing you imitation. I'm showing you, here's a melody. And then I want to show you the same melody transposed. Notice there was a pause there. How did that happen? The frame didn't do it itself. Let me turn on invisible elements here. You can now see I put a breath mark there. And I used the inspector. I selected the breath mark and used the inspector to set its pause to 3 seconds. Realistically, what I normally do is I don't use a breath mark. I use a caesura, which is, defined already by default have a break. So I use this guy here normally. I think in this handout I hadn't stumbled on that yet. So I use this thing. You add this. So I click a note, and then so let me go back to my other score here. And if I click that last note, add my caesura, and then press V to make it invisible, now I'm going to get that 3-second pause by default. So that's generally how I create those worksheets. I do it all the time. Okay, so Dave's question was about mixer settings. So mixer settings are part of your score. So it has to do with the instrument setup. So it's not that you would copy them to other scores, but you would save your score as a template. So for instance, I've done a lot of customizations in this score here. This started off as a jazz lead sheet template, but then I customized some things, including some of the playback sounds. So in order to then use this same settings in other scores, all I'm going to do is File, Save As, and then I'm going to save it not to my scores folder, but I'll go scores, and then I'll go up a level to templates. And now, if I save it here, I'll just keep calling it MuseScore Café. Now, when I go to create a new score, new cafe, I can select it under custom templates, MuseScore Café right there. And it will now inherit all of those settings, the actual layout of the instruments, the style settings, and any mixer settings. Because the mixer settings won't make any sense at all to copy to a score that doesn't have the same instrument layout. So it's a requirement that you have the same instrument layout in order for that to make any sense at all. So you might as well just do it when you create the score. So that's what exists. Now, would it be in principle possible to say, I promise I'm going to use exactly the same instruments. Would you please copy over all the settings? And if the instruments are off, I will pay the price and acknowledge that. Yes, it would be possible for that to happen if someone were to write a plugin to make it possible. So probably that's possible to do via a plugin, but it's normally we just expect that you would just do it the simple way, which is creating a template. And so getting back to the question about how style, once you've set up a score with the style the way you want it, like here I mentioned that I took the jazz combo template, tweaked a few things. Now that I've saved it as a template, there's my house style, right? If it's not always the same instruments, if it's just you want the style settings to be the same, then you can go to Format, save style and create a style file that you can then load into another score. That won't depend on the specific instruments. So that way you could just load a style into some other thing. Like I could take my pianissimo here, which is just using all default style settings, and I could say load style and load one of the style files that I've created already, like where's the jazz one? Here's a jazz one. Now pianissimo is in jazz style. Not necessarily appropriate, but anyhow, it works. By style, I just mean things like, how the clefs look and all that. So the mechanics of how you do it is that. How you choose to make your style, well, it's going to be up to you. I would just say use the defaults until you have a good reason not to. Okay, so I'm continuing to kind of check here. All right, so there's a question about posting to MuseScore, and I can't do a good job of answering that because I'm not a lawyer and every country is different. But what I can tell you is if it's still under copyright when you post it, it will get posted if... So MuseScore.com has license agreements with a lot of different publishers, and if the publisher of that happens to be one of them, you're good. The score will be there. You can make it public if you want. People will be able to download it if they have a pro account. They will need a pro account to do the download, and the money that comes from the pro account goes to pay the publisher. So that all works. Now, if the publisher of that piece is not one MuseScore.com has a license agreement with, then at some point this fact will be detected and your score will get marked unlisted, so people can't find it. That's basically what will happen. So you can still have it there, but because there's no license agreement in place, they'll mark it unlisted. The specifics of how that works, I can't really answer. Now, I see a question about dynamics not working, but they absolutely do unless you've done something to change it. So I will show you. Now, when I say they absolutely do, they actually absolutely do if you put in all the necessary information. Like, let me put in a crescendo right here. There was no obvious change in dynamic. Let me get rid of that breath mark now. Why was there no obvious change? Because I didn't tell it how much louder to get. Let's try it again, but this time I'm going to mark that first note as pianissimo, and I'll mark the note afterwards as triple forte. Now let's hear it. So, absolutely works if you put in the necessary information. Now, if you don't want to actually show this, if you'd rather have performers reading your score guess how loud to get, you can make it invisible. Or you can select the crescendo and just use the inspector to put in the velocity change. This velocity, MIDI velocity on a scale of 1 to 127, basically. How much of a change you want there to be. I don't recommend that because the musicians reading it are not going to see the inspector. They're not going to see your invisible dynamics. If you put in a crescendo, you really should put in a dynamic so people know. Now, it's sometimes the case that if you've had a whole bunch of them already and it's all been mezzo forte to double forte, and here's another passage exactly like it, and you know that people are going to understand that's what you meant, then okay, fine, they don't need to see it again, and if you can save space by making it invisible, go for it. But otherwise, it works. Okay, so yeah, so Easy to Love got taken down. Yeah, so you can make it public and they'll take it down for you. There's no harm in just putting it up there. It's not a strike against you. It's not like YouTube where you get in trouble. Actually, even in YouTube, you don't really get in trouble for doing that. You only get in trouble for other things. But there is no harm in making something public and then just waiting to see if they mark it unlisted on you. Okay. So play on off works for individual notes. Oh yeah, absolutely. You can take individual notes and mark them. In fact, that's the only thing it's good for. At least on the note section of the inspector. You can also turn off the playback of trills. You can turn off the playback of lots of anything individually, including notes. Pretty much anything that plays, you can make it not play using the inspector. So basically, if people are having issues with crescendos, I guarantee if you do what I did, it works, with one exception. That's if you do change something from the default. So I'm going to show you a way to make it work. You can go to the mixer and you can say, hey, I don't want to use the piano anymore. I want my piano to sound like, oh, I don't know, violins. So I'm going to pick violins fast Exper. Don't use the Exper. When the piano isn't capable of single note dynamics. Exper basically, it stands for expressive, and it has to do with single note dynamics. Some instruments support them, some don't. Do not mix and match. Piano does not support single note dynamics, meaning there's no physical way on a piano to press a note and then have it get louder. Just can't happen on a real piano. So therefore, substituting an instrument, a sound that is designed to work with single note dynamics, won't work correctly. It might happen to kind of work a little bit, but it might not. So yeah, it didn't do it. Right? We didn't get any crescendo there. We didn't get any dynamics at all. We just got the D not playing because I turned it off a minute ago. So because I switched to the Exper sound, it's not going to respond to it. You have to stay within the right bounds. Because piano is a not Exper instrument, you need to switch to the non-Exper version of violins. Or better yet, don't try to add a piano staff and then change the sound to violins. Actually change the instrument. So now this should work. So Exper is for instruments that support single note dynamics. Non-Exper are for the instruments that don't. Do not mix and match. It won't work. How do you know the difference? It's when you first go to the mixer, if you see Exper in there and you want to change sound, substitute another Exper one. If you don't see Exper in there, don't substitute an Exper one. Substitute only non-Exper ones. You can also right-click a staff, go to Staff Part Properties, and check this box there to change whether the staff uses single note dynamics. But better yet, if you really want it to be a violin, don't play games with it. Just change it to a violin. I clicked the change instrument button here. So actually change it to a violin. And now that'll change the name and the range and everything, not just play games with the playback sound. And now it'll do the right thing. So if you do the right things, the dynamics absolutely work. If you've got a score where you've done something wrong and they don't, go ahead and post it. Actually, best to post, if you can post it in the next few minutes, I can take a look. Otherwise, go to the support forum and post it there. Someone will be able to show you where the problem is and show you how to fix it. Okay, so okay, so there was a hypothetical question about the start and end point. Well, yes, the start point of the dynamic of the crescendo has to be at or after the start dynamic, and the end point of your hairpin also has to be at or before the end dynamic. So yeah, those have to be the case. You can't just like play games with like putting the dynamic somewhere before the end of the hairpin. That's not going to work. But again, do it normally. Put the dynamics before and after your hairpin, and it works. Okay, so can you say how many times a repeat will repeat? Yes, you absolutely can. So if you don't, so this. That is a huge difference. That went all the way from pianissimo to triple forte. So, I mean, you could change your pianissimo to be softer using the inspector. You could make it be totally silent if you want. You can make it be totally silent like that. The fact that it was only one measure, it should be pretty obvious that happened, as obvious as a real musician would make it. But just use the dynamic. If you think that the default dynamics are too subtle, well then just change them in the inspector. It has nothing to do with the crescendo. Just set the actual dynamic, because it will use the actual dynamic to determine the start and end. So how many times does the playback happen? Right-click the measure that has the end repeat, and then go to Measure Properties. And you'll see it says play count of 2. Well, make it be 3, and now it'll play back 3 times. here's 3. And so on. I did a whole cafe on repeats and talked about adding voltas and everything just a couple weeks ago, so you might want to go back to that one, and you'll probably find some other neat tricks there. So again, with the dynamics, I know that the chat is a little behind, but again, this is a huge difference. I'm surprised you're not hearing it. It could be that your audio system is applying some compression, but this actually is an enormous difference between this pianissimo. The pianissimo by default was MIDI dynamic 33, which isn't the quietest possible, but it's not the quietest possible for human either. If you make that be triple pianissimo, you'll see it's 16. Now this is extreme. That is a huge, extreme, dramatic crescendo. And to the sort of thing that's like it's almost unmusical, but you might not be perceiving it as such because it crescendos pretty quickly and arrives at a louder volume pretty quickly. It might be nice if you could change the curve, in other words, like how fast it gets louder, so you can come to the inspector and change that to this other version where it's like these different ones. You have to play with them to see what they mean. So that one there, you saw it was very gradual at first, and then just over the last couple of notes, it suddenly exploded in volume. So there's different curves there that you can put in to playback, but be careful because the extremes are really actually quite extreme already. Okay, so again, Dave, if you've got a score where you did something wrong and it's not working, please go to the support forum, post it. Someone will have you sorted out in minutes, guaranteed. But if you just do things the way I'm doing, I promise it works. How do you get the instrument details dialog? Right click. You're talking about the measure. You're talking about the staff properties. So what you were observing is that if there's multiple instruments, one way of getting there is double clicking the instrument name. That is true. That is one way of getting there, but that's actually not the normal way. That's sort of like an extra way we just added, like in the last couple of years. But the way that's always existed is right click the measure. If you right click the measure, the menu shows up and then staff part properties. And this gives you that same dialog. So you don't need the instrument name to get to the properties there. So if YouTube is compressing the audio on the live, you might not be hearing as an extreme a change as I'm hearing. That could certainly be. All right, I'm scrolling here to see what else I might be missing. Can a dynamic be in the middle of this? Well, yes, you can place one there. You might have to think about how you want that to look visually. Consult some published music. The norm would be that we would actually place two separate dynamics. So let me get rid of that thing. I don't need it anymore. So if I want to be clear that it's a gradual change, then I can put in one hairpin here, and I'm going to use just the shortcut, and then a second hairpin here. That would be the normal way it would be identified. That's the way published music usually does it. So that way it's clear to someone reading that you crescendo up to piano first for 2 beats, and then you go from piano all the way to triple forte over the next 2 beats. It's clear to the performer, and it's clear to MuseScore, and doesn't require any fiddling with the inspector. Okay, so let's see. How do you get the rectangle form? Okay, so I saw that you asked that question on the forum, and it was answered pretty quickly, but I'll show that here as well. If I go to my Piejesu, because it's in 4/2, the note is a brev. So you just add a brev. And this, let me actually add a brev. Sorry, let me try that again. I'm trying to do this visually. I will click the brev, and then click on the staff so you can see what I'm doing. So this is the sort of usual way that brevs are notated today. And so for musicians today, that's what I would recommend. Now there are, historic editions that use the older form of the brev. So if you're writing for musicians who are specifically specializing in medieval music, they might get a kick out of singing the old style brev. So you just go to the inspector and change the head group, no, not the head, yeah, to Alt Brevis. And now you get the old style brev. Again, only do that if you're working with medieval specialists, because most people today won't recognize what that is. Most people today, for that matter, won't recognize a brev at all. But people with at least a passing familiarity with Renaissance music will recognize the brev. So, so there you go. And to do a decrescendo, it's exactly the same. No difference at all. No difference at all. So I go back in here and put in whatever I want my end dynamic to be, and select my range, enter my diminuendo, and so works just exactly as one might hope. Put the symbol in, it works. Now when you're doing that, notice that what I selected the first note and up until but not including the last note. If I selected all the way to the last note and then press the shortcut, it's actually going to think that I want the last note to be part of the diminuendo or part of the crescendo. In other words, like if this had been a half note, that it should continue to be getting softer rather than that be the point of arrival. So you select up until but not including the note that has that final dynamic on it. So also I see something about using advanced edit for more. I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, Graham, but yeah, there is in the inspector lots of other heads here. So under head group, you'll see there's all these other ones, like there's an X with a circle that I can put on for different kinds of note heads. And there's also the note heads palette. The note heads palette has all these different note heads also. And the thing is, if I just change to what looks like it's going to be that type of note, I don't actually get it, because it's still trying to be smart and say, well, it's only a quarter note or it's only a whole note. I'm not going to use that. It has to actually be a brev. That's why I popped over to Piejesu, where I'm in 4/2 time, because brevs only make sense in 4/2 time or greater. Most Renaissance music of this nature, motets, by the way, are written in 4/2 time. They might not be notated as 4/2. It might just be notated as cut time. So here's a little thing. You can right click this, or I can actually click it and go to the inspector properties, either way, and I can tell it to display as cut time. It's still 4/2 for real, but I can have it display as cut time. That's actually the way a lot of Renaissance music would have been published back in the day, like when Gutenberg was publishing music. Okay, so all right. Can you set a fortissimo with less acceleration down? Okay, so what I showed before. Let me put in some notes here. Oh, let me go back to. I'm just gonna create a new score for piano now. Grand staff, and I'm gonna put in some notes here. And I'm going to put an accent mark on one of them, and listen to this. Well, I'm going to put in some more notes first. We're going to listen to this. That's extremely harsh for the accent. The reasons for that are complicated. It has to do with that whole single note dynamics and the changes that were made for that. And because piano doesn't support it, long story short, it doesn't sound very good. So here's my recommendation. You can either select, my recommendation is, the simple recommendation is select the note, go to the inspector, and where it says velocity, put in a negative number here. We're going to reduce the velocity of that note. I'm going to try 30. Again, the scale is 1 to 127. Okay, so with 30, so it must have added about 30 to the velocity. So that by setting it to minus 30, I got like nothing. But let me try subtracting 15 this time. So that time it was a subtler accent. So playing with the velocity of the note itself is how you do it for piano. Again, for instruments that support single note dynamics, it's more complicated than that, but luckily the accent sounds fine on those instruments. Sounds really good. In fact, it gives you an attack, gives you a bang, with a sharp attack, and then it comes back down. But piano isn't smart enough to do that, which is why it sounds so harsh. So in any case, this velocity setting actually only works on instruments that don't support single note dynamics like piano, but it's also the only time it's normally a problem. Now, if you also think that triple forte is too harsh, and it is harsh, but you asked for triple forte. If you asked for, which really means play it as hard as you can. So here's double forte. If that's still too harsh, you can select the double forte and set its velocity here. So this velocity here, again, it's on a scale of 1 to 127. So you can see it's almost maxed out. Maybe you'd find a, whoops, I hit, I wasn't in that field. If I click in here and select it and type 100 instead of 112, I might like it better. To me, that's not loud enough to say double forte, but it's a subjective thing. So you can select the dynamic itself and affect its velocity, and then if you've decided that you prefer that overall to the default double forte, Control Shift drag it back to the palette, and now you've got two different double fortes in here. One of them with the default 112, and one of them with your modified version 100. So there's that. All right. So spacing between notes with opposing note stems is too close. I guess I would need to see an example, Chris. Because I'm trying to think of what you might possibly mean. I mean, I certainly know what you mean by opposing note stems. So let me put some notes up here. I'll put up this, and then I'll put up a B in another voice. So this spacing right here, the idea that we're going for is, to the extent possible, get the stems to look like they align. And that is kind of the norm, but it can depend on whether there's accidentals there and so forth. So if you're trying to change the gap between the notes, leading space won't do it. Leading space will move them both together. Instead, I'll reset that. I'm going to select one of them. Like if I want this B to be further away, I'll select the B, and then using the chord section of the inspector, move it further away, or closer if I want it closer. Now, it's also possible that you were asking about, like, maybe if there's more notes here in another voice, on the next beat. Let's see, where you're concerned that this C is too close to that B. I'm not familiar with cases where that happens specifically. In fact, usually it's too far. But in that case, yes, you could use the leading space adjustment, use a negative leading space adjustment to kind of start to close up that gap. You'll still run into a minimum at some point. Like, I think at this point, I haven't reached the minimum yet. Oh, there's the minimum, because there's a style setting that controls what the minimum note spacing is, and I've now run up against that. But that'll do that. So if you post, if you've got a specific example that you're curious about that this isn't covering, go to my community site, post to the conversation space the score, or even just a picture, since it is such a simple example. I might be able to deal with that. Now, can you put two colors into the palettes? All right, so yes, you can. I mean, if you color something, it will be colored in the palette, but it'll also be colored in your score, which you probably don't want. So here's what I would do. Notice that when I hover over the FF, it says FF. My custom one just says dynamic. Well, if I right-click that, properties, I can now say custom FF. And now when I right-click over that, it'll say Custom FF. And now I know which one's which. So yes, you could certainly make it, if I take that dynamic, if I take that my customized FF and I color it red, and then I drag that thing into the palette, I got a red one in the palette now, but it's going to be red when I add it too. So probably not how you want it to go. Let's see. I'm catching up. You gotta ask more questions. I probably missed something, so if someone else has noticed a question that got missed, then please feel free to. Oh, there's one about voices regarding dynamics. So the thing is, the dynamics do not currently affect a single voice, right? We don't have that ability right now. It's been a request, but typically that doesn't happen in real life. I mean, when you put in like in a piano score or a guitar score, it's assumed the dynamic applies to all voices, but sometimes you'll see people playing games with multiple dynamics and different dynamics for different voices. What's also possible is that you really don't want a separate dynamic marking. You just want the playback to be more expressive. MuseScore 4 is going to do some amount of that by default. Well, sort of by default, but there'll be a facility to do that. But if you want to do that, like if I want to have something, like let me open my fugue score now here, and say that I want to, for pedagogical purposes, play. Let's say I want to bring out the melody. Well, I'm going to select the melody being this bottom voice. That's the subject of my fugue. If I select this, I can then use well, there's a couple things I can do. One is go to the mixer. If I go to the mixer, I can actually select my, make sure my piano staff is selected, and I can mute voices individually. That's sometimes useful. But more often, what you'll want to do is go to the selection filter, View, Selection Filter, and that gives you this nice little window down here. And I usually go just as far as slurs because that's all I ever need. And now I'm going to exclude voice 1 from the selection. So now only voice 2 is selected. And now I can press the notes button in the inspector and only the voice 2 notes are selected. Because otherwise it was also including stems and beams and things, and so you didn't get anything useful in your inspector. But once you click the Notes button, now I can come in here and put in a positive offset for my velocity, and it'll bring out that melody. Right? And I could also do the same thing in reverse, exclude voice 2, and only select the voice 1 notes and pull them down in that same way. By the way, when you're done with the selection filter, remember to reset it. Select all again, because if you leave voice 1 unselected, you won't be able to select anything. It's really a drag about it, but it is what it is. Okay, what else do I got here? To make new instruments. So not sure exactly what you mean by new instruments, but if you mean new sounds, you can make all the sounds you want. You need a sound font editor. So do a web search to look up about sound font editors, but there's a million sound fonts out there already. Chances are whatever instrument you want, there's already a sound font for it. Now, if there's something specific like, oh, well, it's just a different kind of trumpet. It's a trumpet that's in a different key or something. Well, first of all, be aware that in the instruments dialog, like if I press I right now, let me undo all my changes. I'm going to press I. If I go to where it says brass and open this up, you'll only see B flat trumpet. But if I type trumpet into the search box, you see that there's actually support for tons of trumpets, but they're all using the same sound. They're all using the same trumpet sound. The only thing that's going to be different about them is their transposition, how they're labeled in the score, and how MuseScore marks which notes are out of range, or maybe which clef is used, because that could be like the bass trumpet might be actually notated in bass clef, although probably not. This list is possible to customize. There's a special file that you can customize and add your own definitions, but really there's no particular value to it. If you wanted, like when I look at this, I see F, E, E flat, D, C, B flat, and A, but gee, there's no G trumpet. Well, then all I really got to do is come to a score and add a B flat trumpet, and then I can right-click the thing, and under Staff Properties, just change its name to G, and change its transposition to, I guess this G trumpet sounds a fourth lower probably, so I select its transposition, and boom, now it's a G trumpet. So as far as the actual instrument properties, you can do that easily enough already, but if you literally want a new sample, then you need a new sound font, and there's a million of them out there. You can also create your own. MuseScore is not a sound font editor, it's a notation program, but there are free and open source sound font editors out there. So I see, I'm a little confused, Alan, by your question. When you go to File Recent, the only thing that will ever show up under Open Recent here are actual scores. It could be a Music XML file, or it could be an MSCZ or an MSCX file, which are MuseScore's formats. But you won't ever see PDFs in here. So my guess is what happened is that these were scores that you imported using the import PDF facility, which does go through a website. Import PDF uses the facility on MuseScore.com to convert your PDF to a Music XML. Then it downloads that Music XML to your system, or it gives you the option to download it, and then you open it. And so, yeah, maybe you are looking at that downloaded Music XML file. But it's not on the web, other than the fact that it was temporarily uploaded long enough to do the conversion from PDF to Music XML. So it was basically, online long enough to do that, but no longer, and it's not visible to anyone else. But anyhow, that's what's going on with that, is my guess. So let's see. Update on arrival of MuseScore 4. So the arrival, I'll post you the link here. I'll put it in the chat, because there was a nice article by Martin Tantacrul. Tantacrul is his, nickname. Martin Curie is his actual last name. Or is it pronounced Carey? It's Irish. I don't know how we pronounce these things. But if I go to the MuseScore official forums, that's where all announcements and things are typically made. So I'll go to the forum, and then the announcements forum. So this is where all official announcements are made, and here's an announcement he made just 2 weeks ago with an update. I will post that link directly so you can access that. But the bottom line is we're getting close to alpha-ish. I mean, originally it was supposed to be mid-September. They realized that, no, that's not the case. But hopefully sometime in October there will be an alpha. The alpha will be a low-key alpha because it's still nowhere near done. It's not like, oh boy, it's almost ready alpha. It's, I think we've sort of implemented most of the stuff that we're going to do. A lot of it doesn't work yet, but we want people to start playing with it. We're not there yet, but we're getting close to there. And so there'll be a sort of a low-key kind of maybe private alpha, and then, invitation or, sign up for. Then there'll be a more public alpha. So you see private alpha, public alpha. And then there will be a beta. And so there's kind of a possible, hint at a schedule in here, but, we don't really know exactly the answer. But basically, we're still, a couple months out from having anything that's really worth playing with. Now, Sora was asking about importing a PDF, and the thing is, MuseScore itself doesn't. But if you go to File, Import PDF, what happens is it sends you via your web browser to MuseScore.com. And on MuseScore.com, they are running a program called Autoverus. Autoverus is an open source a PDF to music XML converter. Now there's a bunch of PDF to music XML converters out there, commercial ones that you can buy. Some of them have free trials, maybe free limited versions, I don't know. But Autoverus is like a free open source version. So for best results, you can download and install Autoverus yourself, but it is complicated to use. It's got a lot of options, a lot of customization, but if you're willing to just roll the dice and take some defaults, you can try to upload a PDF file. I will tell you right now, don't get your hopes up. Not very often is it going to work well enough to be interesting. So let me see. Here's a reunion. We've all seen my score reunion. Most of you have. It'll probably take a little while, and I might not have time to get at this because sometimes there's like a backlog, and it isn't there for another hour or two or more. But yeah, it'll bring up something. But realistically, the amount of work it takes to actually fix a PDF that gets converted to music XML this way, it's usually more work. Oh, there it was. It was fast. Good. I'm going to try it. We're going to see what happens. I will say that in my experience, it rarely is more efficient than entering it by hand. But you never know. You just never know. Sometimes you'll get lucky. So I'll open up my score here. I'll open up the original reunion. So that was 3/6. So here's the original version of Reunion, and here is the version that was converted. And we'll see. All right, so how did it do? Well, it looks not too bad at first. For the first few measures, not bad. This is all good. This is what I wrote. All right, so what happened here is it got an extra beat in that measure. The original had, that slur was to here. I think it got confused by this F being slightly offset, and that addresses that, by the way, hints at Chris's, I think it was Chris, who asked about like multiple voices. Here, the voices were overlapping, so I think I actually had to offset that manually. No, it did that automatically too. But there's some cases like that where you might have to do some manual offsets. I think this example here, I had to offset. Oh yeah, right there, offset manually 0.5. So maybe I did do it here. No, I didn't. It was only this one that I off. It was only when the stems were in the same direction it wanted to merge them, and I didn't. But in any case, it got confused by that and somehow thought there were 5 beats in that measure. Well, because of that, the score is like it's going to take some work to fix that. And you're going to have to understand a little bit about how to deal with things like that. Now, if that was the only mistake, great. But now I'm seeing many, many more. That's fine. Here, again, you can tell by the plus sign, it got too many beats. Again, too many beats in this measure. It missed the triplet. It totally missed it. These were quarter note triplets, and it added a beat. And then it's got this whole empty measure here. It's kind of a disaster. It looks impressive at first, but the amount of work required to turn that into something resembling what I had before would require an expert about as much time as to enter it from scratch. And for someone who's not an expert, it might be almost impossible to fix it. It would almost certainly be easier to do it from scratch. That's my take on this. But some people, if your music is simple enough, you might get lucky. So Autovirus isn't for Mac. Well, it is. It is available. But maybe the current download might be old. Maybe it's only a source download, but I didn't think so. I thought it had a Mac download package. Um, it used to. Um, Packages. I'm obviously in the wrong spot here. Somewhere it used to exist. That's all I can say. There used to. Oh, here's download. Is this the right one? I don't know because you never know what's right and what's someone else's something here. I'm not believing this site at all. That doesn't seem like it's actually the right site. But there was at one point a download package for it for Mac, as far as I knew. Um, but yeah, I'm not really sure here. Um, let's see. Is the thing is it's actually written in JavaScript. I mean in Java, I think, and so that it's in principle pretty platform independent, but the download package could be tricky. So yeah, I actually don't know how to get at it. I haven't recently tried to download it. Oh, there we go to install. Oh, building from sources. Okay, so currently right now it looks like the binary is only for Windows. Once upon a time, someone had a Mac download because I remember seeing it. I am 80% sure. Okay. Yeah, so as far as making the corrections go, yeah, if the music is simple, it'll be easy to find the mistakes, easy to fix them. If the music is complex at all, like my example there, which isn't that complex, just solo piano music, but yeah, chances are there's going to be way more going wrong than you're going to have the time or patience to figure out. But sometimes you get lucky. I don't want to completely denigrate it. And the problem isn't Autovirus, because Autovirus, again, would read all that, and then it itself has all these really nice controls that let you easily say, oh no, this measure really only has 3 beats, and this note belongs on beat 2. It's got these really great controls for fixing stuff like that before it gets turned into Music XML. But once it's turned into Music XML, it's like you've already baked the cake, and you're not going to separate the eggs out from the sugar at that point. Yeah, so that's why it's better if you can run Autovirus yourself, but that requires expertise as well. So realistically, it's an interesting thing to know exists, but that's about it. So I think I've about again caught up to questions here. I'm looking to see if there's anything more. But so I think what I'm going to do is say I'm going to start wrapping things up. If there's any last questions here, feel free to pound a couple in here. But what I'm going to do is just give you one final pitch on the counterpoint course. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to load up my official kind of counterpoint course score, which just is here to give you this overview. This is there. If you click that pin link, you'll see this thing, but I'm going to just play you these examples so you can hear. These are all things that I create as demonstrations in the course, and I do just like in these. So the course itself is very, I'm much more on the point. I don't ramble in the course. I have very focused videos where I have handouts and I'm talking from these handouts and putting a lot of information in a short amount of time. But then I also do demonstrations where they are more free form, and I will create pieces on the spot and talk about the process. And these are actual pieces that I created for demonstrations, and then we use them as exercises where I say, here, I've started this piece, now you finish it. So here's a piece that I started to get you kind of started with the idea of creating two-part counterpoint. So I talk through, before you even get to that point, talk about how all the intervals here, which intervals are consonant, which are dissonant, how they resolve, and how what the principles are to follow. And then I go through and follow them. And then I talk about the same thing as it relates to three part. So that you get practice writing counterpoint in three parts. And, we go on to talk about a lot of other things, talking about imitation, talking about, just all sorts of stuff. And it culminates in two big projects. So one of the projects is a fugue. That's actually the final project. And here's my, my demonstration fugue, which again, I compose right there as the demonstration. Now that was a little playback glitch at the beginning. There we go. And the demonstration is broken down into parts, so I start the fugue, show you how I started it, and then say, hey, you now try your version where you take this a little further, and then I'll have a second part where I take it a little further and talk about how I did it, and take it to the next step, etc. So it's all really organized where you can create a fugue like that. I promise. If you take the course, you will learn everything you need. The other project is a Renaissance style piece, and so some of you have heard this because I posted it, but I'll just play it again here. Now this piece I say is Renaissance style, and it is, and yet there's stuff about it that's actually not, that's using a slightly more modern vocabulary. By the way, a couple people here, I don't know if you're still here, Dave, or maybe Graham also, who said you knew John Rutter. It'd be kind of interesting to contact him and let him know that I took his Pie Jesu melody and turned it into a motet. Anyhow, so it's using some slightly more modern language, which is one of the things that I do in this course, is emphasize that it's not just about Renaissance music, not just about Baroque music, but making it your own. And so in this motet, I actually do that to some extent, and then I go the next step further, which is like, here, this is jazz. So that's using canon technique, and it's absolutely by the book canon, but I'm applying the techniques to jazz. So these are all the kinds of things you'll learn. So again, come back for the Music Masterclass tomorrow, and I'm going to go into really a lot more depth on how these kinds of pieces are created, how you can go about learning it, and show you some of the tricks of the trade here. So anyhow, that's end of commercial. Top of the link is the top of the chat is the link. Click it. You'll also have the discount. It's a this week only for my followers discount. So get on that today. Best day to go ahead and think about enrolling. So do I have interactive video? So I'm not sure. Oh, by interactive you mean like this kind of thing? Well, but in the Music Masterclass I will be featuring compositions that were submitted by students, and so that'll be the interaction that I give in the course. And so come back for the Masterclass tomorrow, and I'll answer all the questions about the course. I hope everyone's enjoyed this session, talking about apparently 25 different questions that I answered. That's not bad. It's like 2 minutes per question or so, 3 minutes per question. No, less than 3, between 2 and 3. So I do some version of this every Wednesday, talking about some aspect of MuseScore. So come back for more next time. The first Wednesday of the month are the Ask Me Anything sessions. Tomorrow, Music Masterclass, special counterpoint webinar edition. Don't miss it. It's going to be a blast.